For 5 years, Molly Nala fed a man who couldn't walk or speak. Then one night, she came back early and heard him say something that made her understand why people disappeared. Before we continue, think about this. If the person you cared for was never helpless, would you run or would you stay long enough to hear the truth? The spoon never shook in her hand. Not once in 5 years. Every morning, Molly Nala unlocked the door at the same time, stepped into the same quiet house, and followed the same routine. Shoes off, bag down, sleeves rolled, no music, no phone. Discipline first. Kang Seok sat by the window in his wheelchair, exactly where she'd left him, head angled slightly toward the light, eyes open, unfocused, legs still, hands resting neatly on his thighs like they'd been placed there by someone else. Breakfast came first. Molly fed him slowly, one spoon, pause, wait for the swallow, another spoon. She didn't rush. Rushing led to mistakes. Mistakes led to questions. Questions led to unemployment. The doctors had said the stroke damaged his speech. The family said recovery was unlikely, permanent, they'd called it. Molly accepted both. Acceptance made things simpler. She talked while she worked, not because he answered, because silence felt heavier when it was shared. She spoke about grocery prices, about her mother's health, about nothing that required a response. He never thanked her, never complained, never reacted when his family visited and spoke around him like he wasn't there. When she wiped his mouth with the cloth napkin, soft, expensive, his jaw tightened for half a second. Molly pretended not to notice. Noticing changed things. Physical therapy in 20 minutes, she said, out of habit. He didn't respond. Before leaving the room, she adjusted the wheelchair so it faced the window. She did this every day, always the same angle, always precise. She believed it was kindness. She didn't know it was positioning. And she didn't know that while she measured every movement to keep him safe, Kang Seok was measuring her just as carefully. Molly learned his patterns faster than she learned the house. How long he took to swallow. How often his eyes shifted toward sound. How his breathing stayed even, no matter what day it was. That part bothered her, though she never said it out loud. Broken bodies usually fluctuated. Good day, bad days, days where something slipped. Kang Seok had none of those. No tremors. No setbacks. No improvement either. Just the same controlled stillness, day after day. His family came once a month, always announced, always brief. They stood near the door and spoke softly, as if volume could disturb something fragile. They talked about legal matters, about timelines, about what needed to be handled. They never spoke to him directly. Molly stayed out of the way, invisible by design. That was part of her value. When they left, the room felt lighter, like it could breathe again. Kang Seok didn't react during those visits. Not a blink, not a shift, nothing that could be called human response. At night, Molly filled out the logbook. Food intake, medication, therapy compliance. No change, she wrote, again and again. Sometimes she wondered who he'd been before the stroke. The framed photos on the wall didn't help. Suits, awards, group pictures where everyone looked tense, like smiling was a requirement. Power, maybe. Whatever it was gone now. Or so she believed. When Molly finished her shift, she turned off the lights in the same order every night. The last thing she did, always, was check the brakes on the wheelchair. Locked secure. She never noticed that they were never locked when she arrived in the morning. And she never asked herself why. Kang Seok never moved while Molly was there. That was the rule. At 6 o'clock sharp, she closed her notebook, washed the spoon, and wiped the counter until it shined. At 6:05, she checked the brakes on the wheelchair one last time. At 6:10, she locked the door behind her and walked away without looking back. She never stayed late. 10 minutes after she left, the house changed. The cameras went dark, not broken, just paused. Exactly 90 seconds, long enough for a man to stand without being rushed, long enough to stretch legs that hadn't been seen moving in years. Kang Seok rose slowly, not because he had to relearn balance, but because control mattered. He tested his weight, rolled his shoulders, adjusted his breathing. The wheelchair remained by the window, untouched. He dressed himself in clothes Molly had never seen. Plain, forgettable, he became smaller somehow, less noticeable. When he left, it wasn't through the front door. Outside, a car waited with the engine already running. No greetings, no small talk. In another part of the city, he sat at a table with men who didn't use names. Documents moved across the surface. Decisions were made quietly. No one argued. Later, he stopped somewhere else. A narrow apartment, peeling paint, a woman who moved slowly and tried not to look sick. He placed medicine on the table, cash beside it, no explanation. From the hallway, a little girl watched him. She didn't know who he was. She only knew he came when things were bad. When Kang Seok returned home that night, he sat back in the wheelchair and arranged his body exactly as Molly expected to find it in the morning. By the time she unlocked the door again, he was broken. Waiting. And Molly Nala walked in, unaware that the man she cared for had already lived a full day without her noticing. Muna didn't ask questions the way adults did. She stored things. Voices. Faces. Patterns. When Molly talked on the phone at night, Muna listened from the hallway. When adults lowered their voices, Muna paid closer attention. Silence told her more than explanations ever had. She knew about the man Molly cared for, the one who couldn't walk, I couldn't speak much, the one who sat by the window all day. And she knew about the other man. The one who came when her grandmother's medicine ran low, the one who never stayed long, who wore caps and glasses and clothes that didn't belong to the neighborhood. Adults treated him differently, carefully, like saying the wrong thing around him could change something. Muna noticed that too. She never connected the two men. There was no reason to. One lived in stories Molly told when she was tired. The other lived in moments that ended too quickly to examine. The day Muna came to the house, she was bored almost immediately. The place was too clean, too quiet, nothing to touch, nothing to move. Molly stepped out to take a call, just a minute. That was enough. Muna wandered down the hallway and saw movement in the living room. A man crossing the space, walking, tall, familiar in a way that made her stop. Before she could call out, the door closed softly. A car engine faded. When Molly came back, Muna spoke quickly, afraid the moment would slip away. I saw the man who helps Grandma. Molly smiled without thinking. Inside here, no sweetheart. To be sure, to prove it, she took Muna straight to the bedroom. Kang Seok sat in the wheelchair, silent, unmoving, eyes fixed on the window. Muna said nothing after that. But she remembered exactly how the man walked. And she remembered where she'd seen him before. The first time Molly saw him walking, she told herself it was fatigue. The supermarket was crowded, bright enough to make everything blur at the edges. She had been on her feet all day. Her mind was already back at work, running through medication times and dinner prep. Then she saw him. Near the exit, standing upright, moving easily through people who stepped aside without realizing why. Her hand tightened on the cart. It was his face, not similar, not close, high. Mr. Seok, she said before she could stop herself. He turned calmly, like he'd been expecting the question from someone else entirely. You're mistaken, he said, voice steady, clear, polite. I'm not who you think I am. No hesitation, no confusion, no panic. He stepped around her and kept walking. Molly stood there longer than she should have, heart pounding in a way that made no sense. People brushed past her, Someone apologized, someone didn't. That night Kang Seok sat in the wheelchair exactly as always, same posture, same stillness, same silence. She watched him while she fed him, looked for something, anything, that might explain what she'd seen. Nothing changed. She told herself exhaustion could play tricks, long hours, responsibility, stress. Still, when she turned off the lights and closed the door behind her, the image followed her home. A man who shouldn't have been walking away from her, and a voice that hadn't sounded weak at all. The second time, Molly didn't doubt herself. It was 3 days later, different stores, different parts of the city, morning light instead of fluorescent glare. She wasn't tired, she hadn't rushed, she had eaten. She saw him before he saw her. Kang Seok stood near the entrance, phone pressed to his ear, body angled like he owned the space around him. He wasn't whispering, he didn't need to. "Yes," he said, "tonight." That was all. The call ended. He slipped the phone into his pocket and turned, then froze, just for a fraction of a second, long enough for Molly to know he recognized her. "Mr. Seok," she said quietly. Up close there was no mistaking him. The same sharp line of his jaw, the same scar near his temple she cleaned around every morning. Even the way his eyes focused, alert, calculating, nothing like the distant stare she knew. "You really should stop confusing strangers," he said evenly. "It's dangerous." Dangerous. The word settled into her chest, heavy and unresolved. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to ask how. She wanted to ask since then. He stepped around her instead, unhurried, and walked out. That night, Molly barely slept. She replayed every moment she had spent with him, every silence, every time she'd felt watched, and dismissed it as imagination. The next morning, Kang Seok was already by the window when she arrived. Wheelchair. Stillness. Silence. He didn't look at her. And for the first time in 5 years, Molly Nala understood something she couldn't explain yet. The man she was afraid of wasn't the one who could walk. It was the one who chose not to. Muna came over on a Thursday Molly hadn't planned for. Her aunt had a last-minute appointment. No backup, no time to argue, just a small bag, a quiet child, and the same house Molly had learned not to question. "Stay in the living room," Molly said, already reaching for her keys. "I will," Muna said. She meant it. Kang Seok was in his room when they arrived, wheelchair by the window, hands placed neatly, head tilted at the same angle Molly saw every morning. Relief came before she could stop it. Molly stepped outside to take a call from her mother, the kind of call you don't ignore, the kind that tightens your chest before you answer. She wasn't gone long. Inside the house, silence pressed in. Muna wondered, not out of disobedience, out of curiosity. Children followed movement the way adults followed rules. That's when she saw him. A man crossing the living room, walking, fast, purposeful. Before she could speak, the door closed softly, a car engine started, then nothing. When Molly came back, Muna spoke quickly, afraid the moment would slip away. "I saw the man who helps Grandma." Molly laughed without thinking, not cruel, certain. "Inside here, no, sweetheart, that's not possible." To be sure, to calm herself, she led Muna straight to the bedroom. Kang Seok sat exactly where he always did. Wheelchair. Silence. Broken. Muna said nothing after that. But she didn't forget the way the man had walked. And Molly didn't notice how carefully Kang Seok avoided looking at the door. Molly said again, "You really should stop confusing strangers. It's dangerous." After that day, Molly watched more closely. Not openly, quietly. She watched Kang Seok's hands when she fed him, watched how his fingers rested, relaxed, not slack. I watched his breathing, too steady, too controlled. She began timing things without realizing it, how long he took to swallow, how long before his eyes shifted, how often he blinked. Nothing changed. That was what unsettled her. Broken people fluctuated. Pain announced itself. This was consistent. At night, she replayed Muna's words. The man who helps grandma. That part didn't make sense. Kang Seok never left while she was there, never walked, never spoke clearly. Unless she stopped the thought before it finished forming. Speculation was dangerous. Questioning a man's condition could get her fired, or worse, labeled unstable. She couldn't afford either. The next morning, she fed Kang Seok breakfast as usual. The spoon is steady, her face is neutral. When she wiped his mouth, his jaw tightened again. This time, she noticed. And for the first time, Molly wondered if the lie wasn't about whether he was broken, but about how long he'd been watching her believe it. Molly realized what she'd forgotten halfway down the stairs. Her phone and the brown paper bag with her mother's medication. She stopped, hand on the railing, weighing inconvenience against the walk back up. The house behind her was quiet, too quiet. She turned around. This time, she didn't announce herself. She unlocked the door slowly and stepped inside, careful not to let it click. Afternoon light cut across the marble floor in clean lines. She took 2 steps and heard his voice. Clear, calm, controlled. Confirm the time, he said, no delays. Molly froze. That voice didn't belong to a broken man. She followed it down the hall, heart pounding, until she reached the living room. Kang Seok stood near the window, phone to his ear, balanced, relaxed, in control. Remove them if necessary, he continued. He ended the call. Then he turned and saw her. You weren't supposed to come back today. This only works if no one makes mistakes anymore. The wheelchair sat empty by the wall. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The spoon lay on the counter where she'd left it that morning. Clean, dry, and suddenly very far away. Molly didn't scream. The shock didn't arrive loudly. It settled into her chest and refused to move. Kang Seok stood near the window, phone still in his hand, weight balanced evenly on both feet. He didn't rush to sit, didn't flinch, didn't pretend. He finished the call first. Yes, he said into the phone, I understand. He ended it, set the phone down on the table, and only then looked at her fully. You weren't supposed to come back today. The words weren't sharp. They weren't defensive. They sounded logistical. Molly's eyes moved on their own. From his face, to his legs, to the wheelchair by the wall. Empty. You're standing, she said. Her voice surprised her, calm, flat, like she was stating the time. I am, Kang Seok replied. She waited for something else to follow, an explanation, an apology, a story that would make this make sense. Nothing came. How long, she asked. He considered the question, not emotionally, but carefully, like the answer mattered. Long enough, he said. Her hand tightened around the medication bag she was still holding. The paper crinkled loudly in the quiet room. You let me believe you couldn't move, she said. He tilted his head slightly. I let you believe I was harmless. That landed differently. Molly took 1 step back without realizing she'd moved. Kang Seok noticed. You don't need to be afraid, he said. She met his eyes then, I really met them. That's not your decision, she said. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not guilt. No regret. Interest. Kang Seok didn't rush to fill the silence. He let it stretch. Let her breathing settle. Let reality finish landing. Then he spoke. The stroke happened, he said. That part is real. Molly didn't respond. She had learned that silence made people say more. I lost control of my speech for months, he continued. Movement came back sooner, faster than it should have. He paused, watching her face. That's when the problems started. What problems? She asked. He looked past her toward the window, not dramatic, just calculating. Medications switched, drivers changing routes without notice, money disappearing from accounts that only my family could access. He said it like a list, not a confession. They thought I couldn't understand them, he said. They discussed everything in front of me. Molly's stomach tightened. Plans, timelines, names. He turned back to her. Broken men aren't watched, they're discussed. She leaned against the wall, grounding herself. So you stayed broken, she said. Yes. You let people think you were finished. I let them get comfortable. The room felt colder. And me, Molly asked. He didn't dodge it. You were consistent, Kang Seok said. Careful, predictable, you followed routine. Routine is safe. That doesn't mean you get to use me. No, he agreed. It means I trusted you not to change. That didn't feel like trust. That felt like calculation. You could have told me, she said again, quieter this time. He shook his head once. The moment you knew, he said, you would have become part of the risk. Molly understood then. He hadn't kept the secret because he didn't care about her. He'd kept it because he cared about survival more. And now, she asked. Kang Seok studied her, eyes sharp, unreadable. Now, he said slowly, I need to decide what knowing makes you. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten, which made the words far more dangerous than either. Kang Seok didn't ask about it right away. He walked past her instead, slow and deliberate, as if the room belonged to him in a way she was only just beginning to understand. He adjusted the curtains, straightened a chair, small movements, ordinary movements, the kind that told her he wasn't unsettled at all. Molly stayed where she was. The medication bag hung from her fingers. Her phone was still in her pocket, suddenly heavy, suddenly loud, even though it hadn't made a sound. Then he stopped. There's something I need to know, Kang Seok said. She felt it before the words landed, the shift, the narrowing of focus. Did the child see anything? The question didn't come with accusations. It came with precision. Molly answered too quickly, no. Kang Seok turned to face her. That wasn't the question, he said calmly. I didn't ask what you told her. Silence pressed in again, thicker this time. She saw someone, Molly said. She thought it was a man who helps my family. She doesn't know who you are. She doesn't know anything about this. Kang Seok watched her closely, not her mouth, but her eyes, her breathing, the space between her sentences. How clearly, he asked. Enough to recognize a face, Molly said, not enough to understand it. He nodded once. Children remember patterns, he said. They remember what doesn't belong. That was when Molly understood the weight of what she'd just said. The danger wasn't the lie. It was a memory. Kang Seok reached for his phone. Visitor access is revoked, he said, effective immediately. Molly's heart skipped. For how long, she asked. He didn't look at her when he answered. As long as necessary. The house was the same. The rules were not. The changes didn't announce themselves. They slipped in quietly, like decisions already made. The next morning, the guard at the gate wasn't the same man. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just checked the license plate twice before letting Molly through. When she asked about it, he said nothing, just pressed a finger to the earpiece and looked away. Inside the house, things felt tighter. The housekeeper who usually arrived before noon never came. Her name vanished from the schedule without explanation. A new driver waited outside, engine running, eyes forward, phone mounted on the dash like a second set of eyes. Molly noticed cameras she hadn't seen before. Or maybe she had seen them and just never understood what they were for. For safety, Kang Seok said when she finally asked. For whose? Molly said. He didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the wheelchair, then sat back into it with deliberate care, arranging his body into the familiar shape she'd memorized. Ours, he said. Her phone buzzed less. When it did, messages arrived late, calls dropped after a few seconds, even her mother's number took longer to connect. That night Molly lay awake listening to footsteps that weren't hers, soft, measured, always stopping just short of her door. She understood then. Protection wasn't a favor. It was a perimeter, and she was standing inside it. By the third day, Molly stopped pretending the house felt the same. It still looked the same. Clean, quiet, expensive. But the rhythm was different. Doors closed more often, not loudly, intentionally. Conversations stopped when she entered the room. The driver waited even when she said she didn't need him, always waiting. At breakfast, Kang Seok sat in the wheelchair again. That unsettled her more than seeing him stand. The performance had returned. She fed him out of habit. Spoon, pause, swallow. Her hand stayed steady, but the meaning had changed. This didn't matter anymore, it was maintenance. When she reached to lock the brakes, her fingers stopped. They were already off. She looked up. Kang Seok was watching her, expression neutral. You didn't, she said quietly. I didn't need to, he replied. A reminder, not a threat. Later that morning, he spoke as if discussing the weather. You can leave. Molly looked at him. You won't stop me. No, but you won't protect me. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Leaving meant exposure. Her mother, Muna, the fragile scaffolding of support that had appeared around their lives so quietly she hadn't noticed when it became essential. And if I stay, Molly asked. Kang Seok met her eyes. Then you accept the perimeter, he said, and the expectations that come with it. The house was silent again. Molly felt the weight of the choice pressing in, not dramatic, not immediate, but constant, like gravity. Staying wasn't safe. But leaving wasn't freedom. It was something else entirely. Kang Seok didn't make the offer right away. He waited. He watched Molly move through the house the way she always had, efficient, quiet, precise. He watched how she adjusted schedules without being told, how she noticed when something was missing before anyone admitted it was gone, how she asked questions that sounded like clarification but were really verification. She didn't panic. She didn't test boundaries. She adapted. That mattered. You're still thinking like a caregiver, Kang Seok said one evening as the city lights came on beyond the window. Molly didn't look at him. That's what you hired me to be. That's what I needed you to be, he corrected, not what you are. She paused. You see patterns, he continued. You noticed the breaks. You noticed the cameras. You noticed when things stopped making sense and you didn't collapse under it. That's survival, she said. No, he replied, that's judgment. He gestured to the table between them. No documents, no contracts, just space. I don't need someone to feed me anymore, Kang Seok said. I need someone who can sit in a room, hear half a conversation, and understand what isn't being said. Molly turned to face him then. You're asking me to work for you, she said. With me, he corrected, not as helpful, not as protection, as a partner. The words settled heavily. And if I say no, she asked. He didn't threaten her. He didn't reassure her either. Then you go back to being a variable I can't account for, Kang Seok said, and I don't like variables. Molly felt the shape of the choice closing in again. This wasn't a rescue. It was recruitment. Molly Nala didn't yet know if she had chosen partnership or just a different kind of cage. Molly didn't answer him right away. She went to the sink instead. She washed the spoon. Slowly, carefully, the way she had done it every day for 5 years. Soap, rinse, dry. Her hands didn't shake. That mattered to her more than anything else. Behind her, the house stayed quiet. Kang Seok didn't press, didn't fill the space with explanations or promises. He had already made the offer. Pushing now would have cheapened it. Molly placed the spoon on the counter and turned. "If I do this," she said, "I'm not your cover, I don't lie for you, I don't spy on people for you, and the child never comes here again." Kang Seok studied with her, not as a man assessing loyalty, but as one measuring risk. "You'll see things you can't unsee," he said. "I already have," Molly replied. Another pause. "And if I decide you're a liability later?" he asked. Molly met his gaze without flinching. "Then you should never have asked me," she said. That was the moment something shifted. Not power. Respect. Kang Seok nodded once. "Accepted," he said. Molly picked up the bowl, not to feed him, but to carry it to the table beside his chair. She set it down and sat across from him instead. For the first time, she wasn't standing over him. She was level. The wheelchair still faced the window. The house still looked peaceful. But Molly Nala was no longer a caregiver. She was inside the perimeter by choice. And she understood now. Partnership wasn't safe. It was my responsibility. And it would cost her something every single day. Nothing about the house looked different. The wheelchair still faced the window, the schedule still ran on time, the staff still believed Kang Seok was broken. That was the point. Molly Nala still arrived every morning at the same hour, moved quietly, and noticed everything. Only one thing had changed. She no longer carried a spoon first. She carried information. She sat in meetings without being introduced. She listened without interrupting. She asked one question at the end that altered decisions without resistance. People adjusted and never understood why. Kang Seok watched her the way he watched threats, carefully, without sentiment. Sometimes he returned to the chair. Sometimes he didn't. Muna never came back, but her school fees were paid and her grandmother's medicine arrived without reminders. At night, Molly stood by the window alone, looking at a city she entered through care, not ambition. Power, she learned, didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it waited years to stand. The spoon rested clean in the drawer. It had done its job. The most dangerous choice she ever made wasn't discovering who Kang Seok was, it was staying beside him after she did. If this story stayed with you longer than you expected, there are more like it on the channel. New Mafia power stories drop regularly. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.